Halito, and welcome to Let's Talk with John Kane and myself, Regan DeLoggins. John, you there?
Yes, I am here, and it's good to hear your voice. I know we left last week's show with you and your plans to attend an event that was happening in the Bronx, and I'd like to hear how that turned out because it sounds like it was pretty outrageous, which is what we've been experiencing, in all of these cities. We're also going to spend some time talking about Columbus losing his head and his footing in a few places. But let's start with where you left us last week. There, Regan. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So we ended last week with a call to action to come to the Bronx for what was referred to as FTP4, in which a march was organized to in solidarity with with Black Lives Matter, with George Floyd, with Breonna Taylor, with Nina Pop, with Tony McCabe, David McCarthy, with a number of other Black folks who have been violently murdered by police. And we kicked off in every way that we have begun any march in good spirits and also angry and sad. This is a time of grieving. We're all grieving the loss of so many people and so much police violence. And we were met with such incredible and heightened and elevated police violence. It was actually incredibly traumatizing to experience as well as to witness. And the march was actually very quickly ended because the police presence was so high and so violent that most people that participated were all violently arrested, not just arrested, but violently arrested. There have been videos circulating of what is referred to as a kettle, which is when cops surround people on all sides and then step forward and arrest for mass arrest. And we witnessed one of those, but it was crazy. It was a crazy experience to witness and to participate in. Cops were jumping on top of cars and cop cars, to swing down and hit us in the head with their batons while we were in this kettle, so no one could escape. And the kettle was particularly strategically started at 7:45, so that once they came in at 8:02, 2 minutes after curfew, folks were charged with breaking curfew. Like that was the violent reaction that was started, which was meant to be a protest, peaceful or not is irrelevant. It was an incredibly violent day. I have never seen that much police presence. We were outnumbered. It was crazy.
Well, I mean, and again, to explain the this notion of a kettle. So the whole intent here was not to disperse a crowd. I mean, this wasn't to say, you must leave, you must,
No.
you must obey the curfew. This was to trap and literally lock in those people who were within the kettle, but even people who were outside of it were being knocked around. So even people who didn't get arrested were still being violently assaulted with pepper spray and with batons, being knocked to the ground. All of that stuff was happening. So, yeah, I mean, so people understand this wasn't about trying to disperse a crowd. The whole idea that people associate with a crowd control or a riot squad is to disperse the crowd. But no, that wasn't their intention at all.
No, not at all. If you look at there's a bunch of videos that are circulating, and there's one that was quite good in terms of it was an aerial view, because we were on 138 and Brook Ave when the kettle started, and it's right across the street from a large from some projects. And so people in the projects took video of what was happening, and people from the projects actually ran down and came to folks' aid in an attempt to help them. as we were being attacked by the police. And they themselves were then violently arrested, attacked, and dispersed by police as well. But there's a really great, and by great I mean informative, there was a very informative video that was taken from somebody in the project that is from an aerial view and recorded the entire kettle, which you can see starting before curfew, with violence escalating once curfew hit. And it, you know, the intention was to continue moving, and we were stopped in our tracks and then encircled by cops, who then put pressure on us by stepping forward, and then pepper spraying everyone, hitting them with batons, and then arresting them. There was no call for, you know,
no commands, no commands.
You know, just no commands, no dispersal requests or commands. None of those were made. It was just to trap all of us and to attack. And what was the most disturbing part of all of this for me, I was outside of the kettle, and there to provide all sorts of support, including medic support. And people were screaming from within the kettle for a medic, screaming for a medic, because they're being pepper sprayed, hit in the head with batons, choked, pushed down. For each person that was arrested, there were 4 cops on their back. And so you had people screaming for medic support, which is supposed to happen. If you ask for a medic, they are required to provide one for you. And medics were not allowed into the space. And there was a video that I sent you, John, that went somewhat viral, in which I'm stepping forward, telling people to raise their hands up so that they don't get a resisting arrest charge on top of breaking curfew. And I am blindsided by a cop that comes out of nowhere and pushes me so roughly that I fell to the ground and hit my head on the concrete. And we've seen a lot of other videos of folks being pushed to the ground and hitting head on the concrete that have also gotten viral, have also had traction. And I am one of those people that was violently pushed to the ground for being outside of a kettle, for advocating for medics to be able to go in and support folks, and also to tell people to raise their hands. It's not illegal for me to tell people, raise your hands up, you know, hands up, don't shoot, hands up. We're like, that's not illegal. And I was pushed so forcefully to the ground that I hit my head on the concrete, all of which was also caught on camera.
Yeah, I ran a little piece of that
3 or
video.
4 different angles. A lot of what's been happening. Okay, so what's been happening since then is a lot of gaslighting from the NYPD. There was a conference that was held 2 days ago by the Attorney General, and people who had been experienced police violence were asked to come in order to, you know, to voice their grievances, voice their pain, as part of this committee hearing. And it was supposed to start at 10 o'clock. And the NYPD took up 6 hours of that time in all of it, in which they kept just justifying how they acted, justifying pepper spraying peaceful protesters, justifying hitting people in the head with batons to the point they were sent to the hospital. We picked up just as many people from the hospital as we did from precincts after many of these actions. Because, you know, we provide jail support so that folks aren't left alone after being arrested. And we have had to pick up our comrades at hospitals as well, because they were so horribly attacked. And so there was this, like, you know, conference in which it was 6 hours of the NYPD just, you know, standing their ground, saying, we've done everything. We've never pushed a peaceful protester to the ground. I can attest that that's not true. We've never, you know, we don't pepper spray peaceful protesters. There's plenty of videos showing people just sitting on the ground being pepper sprayed. We don't tear gas unless it is necessary. We don't tear gas peaceful protesters with military grade tear gas. That's not true. That happened. There's plenty of videos. And so 6 hours of the time was spent with the NYPD justifying all of their actions. And then the rest of the time which, by the way, this ended at 9 p.m. at night, so it was almost, a full day's event, which of this call. They spent the rest of the time just rushing people off of their time, off of their allotted time. Everyone who came to the call was given an allotted time to speak their pain, speak their experience, and they were told to continuously yield their time, which was not done by the NYPD. So we see that, which is, a quote unquote legal route to go through if that is something that you're interested in. But there's also a number of videos, including one of Cuomo and of de Blasio, both of them saying, and just, supporting the NYPD, saying that, again, none of these mistakes were made. No one overstepped their boundaries. Everyone acted within protocol. And I'm really, really thankful for the number of filmmakers who have spliced together that speech with videos of the things that they're saying they did not do, so that folks can see play by play when Cuomo says we don't pepper spray peaceful protesters, then the next cut is of a peaceful protester being pepper sprayed.
Who are you going to believe? Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's been, and both Cuomo and de Blasio are incredibly, to gaslight the people of New York City in this way is so incredibly detrimental and so honestly stupid, considering that we live in an age of social media and people have access to smartphones. We are able to so easily debunk what is being said, that what is the point of lying?
Well, but this is where it comes down to the same thing about debunking the whole bad apple thing. This is proof, both from the attorney general to the mayor to the governor to obviously the police in all of their rank and file, that it's a systemic problem. When you've got the governor defending this action and refusing to acknowledge that these videos have captured all of this stuff. I mean, it's proof positive that this isn't about just the killing of innocent unarmed people. This is about a culture of violence, a culture of thuggery that exists with all of the police. And I'm sorry, I've got friends, I've got people on Facebook who keep saying over and over again, look, there are some really, really good cops out there. I know some people on the police force. And I say, you ask, if you have a friend who is a police officer, you ask them if they would have tackled Chauvin as he was snuffing out the life of George Floyd. You ask any police officer if they would ever physically interfere with another police officer who was assaulting somebody. You ask any police officer if they would file a complaint, if they would testify, if they would stand up for the people as opposed to the police officers. And I guarantee you, if one of them says they'll do it, they're probably lying. And if they're not, then it's just words coming out of their mouths. And you're seeing this with the mayor, you're seeing this with the governor, you're seeing it with everybody all the way up. And of course, let's not leave out the moron in the White House. We had a situation back here in Buffalo where a 75-year-old man was really just, he walked up to, he wasn't obviously he wasn't trying to physically intimidate anybody, and they knocked him down so hard, and they shoved him, and he fell so hard that immediately as his head hit the concrete, blood started pouring out of his ear. And the president of the United States tried to say that the whole thing was a setup and that it was scam, like he had blood tablets in his ear or something like that. The president of the United States literally tried to, first off, accused him of being Antifa, which is an absurd proposition anyway, since there is no real Antifa in terms of an organization, the way people are trying to allege. But they're trying to say the 75-year-old guy was an agitator, and that he had somehow, both the mayor of Buffalo and the president of the United States want to try to again shame the victim and try to make, just literally pull from thin air these allegations of inappropriate behavior on the part of a man who was just knocked senseless. I mean, I think he's still in the hospital today. I mean, he literally hemorrhaged from hitting his head on the ground to where not only did he get an abrasion on his head, but blood poured out of his ear. And this is the craziness that we're seeing at all level of government, all level of policing authority. And I mean, it's the part that's really absurd is that the protests, the demonstrations, the gatherings are, the whole intent is to stand up against police violence. And how do the police respond? With police violence. They literally make the case that this goes beyond George Floyd. It goes beyond Eric Garner. It goes beyond Tamir Rice. It goes beyond Ahmaud Arbery. It goes beyond all of that stuff because the system is geared towards abusing citizenry.
And I also want people to know, for those who don't understand what Antifa is, Antifa means anti-fascist, and it's a political movement. It's made up of many autonomous groups, and it's people who are against fascism. It's like the fact that we see, there's a lot of involvement usually that's against the far right and racism and fascism and general harassment. But Antifa is a system, or people rather, that work autonomously against fascism. And we are in a time, and have always been under a regime, but right now we're in a time and under a regime that reads as fascist. This is when people are saying things like, oh, a 75-year-old man he tripped over his feet, which is what Trump said, which is obviously not true. You can see the video, he was pushed to the ground. He was, he tripped over his own feet and he had blood pellets in his ears. No, he was pushed to the ground violently by a militarized police force that are there to protect property instead of people. That is fascism.
Well, and then to make it worse, that entire unit, the emergency response team, rallied behind the two officers that knocked this guy to the ground, and they resigned their positions as a part of this emergency response team. So now you have 57 officers that say, well, no, we will no longer serve in this capacity because as show of solidarity to the two officers. Again, totally throwing out the whole bad apple thing. And to make matters worse, when they were arraigned, hundreds of Buffalo police officers showed up, and almost an equal number of Buffalo Fire Department personnel showed up to support these officers who hurt this man, who violently hurt this man. So it just keeps adding and adding and adding to the systemic problems. And so when people say defund or disband or to eliminate police departments, they're not, those who are saying, well, that's absurd, you're not weighing in, you're not understanding and acknowledging how systemic the failures are. I mean, look, the police are not effective at doing any of the things that they claim that they do. I mean, they aren't effective at stopping crime. They aren't really that effective at investigating crime. They pick and choose what they're going to investigate. They aren't that effective at solving murders or rapes or assaults. They, other than walking around being tough guys who have the ability and the leeway to abuse people, other than their presence being intimidating as these militarized police that you described, that's their only function, is to be like a pit bull on a chain, and a chain that's let loose all the time.
And I think that it's also like it's really something else that I want folks to understand with this whole like, oh, it's a bad apple rhetoric or narrative that's being really pushed right now, is that if you look at the videos of cops, this is just videos of cops pushing people to the ground. I'm not even relating to police violence yet, other escalated police violence. But let's just say, look at the videos of people being pushed to the ground. The second that man in particular was pushed to the ground and blood started pouring out of his head, why did no officer come to his aid and check on him? When the young black woman was pushed to the ground so aggressively that she's having seizures now in Brooklyn, no cops stepped forward and were like, hey, are you all right? You just hit your head really hard. When I got pushed to the ground, nobody checked on me. No cop checked on me. In fact, actually, I was immediately pepper sprayed afterwards. Like I'm on the ground, like people didn't come and offer, there weren't cops or even the fire department medics who were there on Thursday offered no help to people calling out to medics. They only provided medic support to the police. This is why we say all cops are bastards. This is why we say FTP. This is why we are pushing for the abolition of the police department, because every cop is a bad apple. This is a systemic issue. They are not looking out for the people, quote unquote. They're looking out for themselves and for property. There is nothing efficient, helpful, useful about any system of police, whether it's ICE, whether it's traffic cops, whether it's riot police. They are all inherently based in violence against the people that they are meant to, quote unquote, protect.
Yeah, they're told who the enemy is, just like not just militarized police, but the military. They are told who the enemy is, and that is who they are there to fight. And again, I want to be clear here. No one gave you a command. Nobody grabbed you and then pulled you back. That officer, who was a big man, ran up to you and blindsided you. You didn't even see him coming. You could see in the video that you never even saw him coming. He came up and sent you flying. And this guy had to go 250, 300 pounds. He was a big man, a weighty guy, and he just sent you flying. And then just walked away. Never looked at the result of what he had done to you. And again, you got to point out that some of these assaults are like sucker punches. People never even see them coming. All of a sudden, a police officer smashes somebody in the head with a baton or a wand, or knocks them flying. That would be like saying you just tripped. The fact that you got sent flying, just like Martin Gugino did. He didn't trip. He could never regain his balance from being knocked, off balance by the police. That's exactly what you experienced.
The cop who pushed me to the ground came from behind me and pushed me to the ground. There was no, hey, step back. Which, by the way, I was within all legal rights from where I was standing as somebody who works in jail support and does medic work. I was within the space I was allowed to be in. I wasn't even in the kettle. I was outside of the kettle. I was maintaining the perimeter that there was no. I wasn't in a wrong place. I was on the sidewalk because I had been told to get out of the street. Went to the sidewalk, stayed there. And I was pushed to the ground. He came out of nowhere. And then, something I didn't add that's important is I was denied his badge number. When asked, I got up and, asked for his badge number over and over again. And I was denied his badge number. And multiple cops, if you can even see in the video, he just disappears into the crowd of cops, and other cops just step forward. And then after that, I was pepper sprayed. I was denied his badge number. I was denied to know who the person is who pushed me to the ground. I do not know who it was. There are a couple of videos out there from folks that were right behind me who have good shots of his face. But then I was looking to find his badge number, and they were covered. All the cops covered their badge numbers with these little Blue Lives Matter, ribbons.
Really? That's
all
incredible.
Of them are wearing them.
That's incredible.
Yeah, they're like all of them. It's been happening all week, and we have the right as people to ask for their badge number.
This is supposed to be the transparency issue, right?
And they are supposed to give it. You say, yes, I ask for your name and your badge number, and you're actually supposed to hand me a business card. If I ask a cop, I need your name and badge number, they are supposed to give it to me and also provide a business card with the precinct that they are on, a name and a badge number. And I was denied all of that, and all of their badge numbers were covered with a Blue Lives Matter ribbon. All of them.
Look, Regan, before we go to break here, I do want to ask one other question. To what extent did you, or is there any evidence that any property was damaged, other than what the cops damaged by jumping on top of vehicles or whatever else? What looting and rioting and property damage or vandalism did you experience?
Personally, I had not witnessed any on Thursday. I have not witnessed any on Thursday. We were in the street, we were marching, and the only violence or looting, or not even looting, but any violence or destruction of property that I personally saw came from police, specifically cops on top of citizens' cars, laying on them on their bellies, flat on the hood and on the roofs of cars, swinging their batons down, hitting people in the head, breaking their skulls open. I saw multiple people go to the hospital who now needed staples in their head. I saw that, and then when they missed our bodies and our heads, they hit windows and broke the cars that they were laying on. I did not see or witness any of this, not that I'm against vandalism or looting or anything like that, but I did not witness any of that on Thursday when violence was perpetrated against us.
And I want to add to that. Look, I'm not opposed to any of these protests where a stand has been taken against capitalism, against some of this property. I'm not against even any shape or any way, shape, or form rioting as a part of this protest. I'm not against that at all. But the fact that they'll use that argument, and because I've taken the position on this thing that I've never seen any police stop any form of vandalism, any form of rioting, or any form of of any kind of property destruction. All I've seen them do is escalate violence. That's all I've seen them do. Why don't we have Reggie go off with a tune here? We'll take a bit of a break and we'll come right back. Regan, I do want to talk about the fact that Christopher Columbus has not had a good week this week either, and we'll go through some of that a little bit when we come back. All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane
with
Regan.
Welcome back to Let's Talk.
We're both there with Regan DeLoggins. Look, I want to spend the rest of our time.
You go ahead, John.
Okay. I want to spend the rest of this time talking about the fact that something has turned here on the Christopher Columbus statue thing. And I think it's a combination of the Confederate monuments issue, the Black Lives Matter issue, Native people wanting to step up and make some of their own statements. But thus far, and there may be more by the time I get off the air here and check it out. But thus far, in Richmond, Virginia, they toppled a Columbus statue and threw the entire statue in a pond. In Boston, they decapitated a Columbus statue, and then I think the city removed the statue. And in Minneapolis or St. Paul, I'm not sure which one, but in Minnesota, a crowd also toppled a Columbus statue. And it's funny. I'm listening and I'm watching these people who are responding to it, and all of these people who are outraged at this act of violence. And I heard I saw one person post on one of these threads that said, "Oh, well, let's go ahead and take down the Native American statues." And I said, you know what? Go ahead. In fact, give us a call. We'll help, because you know where those statues are? They're all in these high schools that have been using us for mascots and for mocking us anyway. In fact, we'll help take them down. So by all means, you want to take down. We're not into the whole statue thing. That's a white person thing. Frankly, even the black statues are like being promoted by this is a white man concept. The idea of creating these statues. Look, I'm not condemning all of it, but that's not our practice. So when I hear some white person say, "Oh, those Native Americans, they're tearing down our history," no, how about we're trying to represent what is the true history? So when I hear people sing the praises of Confederate monuments, or the fact that their military bases are named after Confederate generals and that kind of stuff, and when I hear people going on and on about these Columbus statues, I ask the question, "Hey, New York, when are you stepping up?" and Regan, I'm not asking you personally, by the way, but I'm asking when does New York step up? In Syracuse, they have a really, really racist Columbus statue, and it's actually got Native people. You can look it up online. They got Native people cowering underneath at the feet of Columbus at their statue. In Buffalo, they've got a number of Columbus statues. So, in fact, I had heard that one of them got toppled, but I think that might have been misrepresented. So, I'm waiting for this Columbus statue thing to spread from city to city, because it's our stamp on what's happening with this thing in general. Because, and to be clear, the first slave ships didn't show up in 1619. The first slave ships were Columbus's ships. Those were the first. They were taking slaves from the Americas to back to Spain and Europe, and the transatlantic slave trade was begun by Columbus. So even from a Black Lives Matter standpoint, there should be a strong sentiment supporting the removal of Columbus statues.
No, I totally agree. Especially, like, a lot of people talk about 1619 as the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, but that was just when the Dutch West India Company was beginning to formalize the slave trade. The chattel slavery had to happen previous to that, and it all began with, as you said, with Columbus, and not to just say, oh, it's because he discovered America, that's why chattel slavery began. No, Christopher Columbus participated in enslavement, including and all of the people that he brought over, like the men and soldiers and tradesmen and all that. They also participated in enslavement throughout the DR, as well as mostly in the Caribbean, and that then set off what became the English and Dutch slave trade. So there was a slave trade previous to English and Dutch slave trade.
Well, and again,
and it began with
the doctrine
with Columbus.
The doctrine of discovery, which is associated with these papal bulls. It should be noted that the first papal bull was 50 years before Columbus set sail to stumble upon the Western Hemisphere. The first papal bull was referring to Portugal taking slaves out of out of Western Africa. So the first papal bull that was associated with the slave trade and this idea of the doctrine of Christian discovery was associated with Portugal taking slaves from Western Africa. So, and that's 50 years prior. That's 1450s. So that's how long Europe had gotten engaged in this idea of chattel slavery.
I love seeing monuments come down. I grew up in the South. Unfortunately, there are a lot of Confederate monuments where I grew up, specifically one that's called Stone Mountain, which is a huge, it's a batholith, which is similar to like a mountain, but it became a site of museums and all sorts of like weird things. But something that was also done on this site was that the three Confederate generals were carved into the side of this mountain as like a relief. And also, mind you, this mountain is a place where Cherokee ceremony has happened for tens of thousands of years in time immemorial, and was bastardized with this Confederate monument that has always been like a tourist trap for folk. So I grew up in an area that had a huge amount of Confederate monuments, and I've never quite understood. When I was younger, I didn't understand why they were there, and now as an adult, I understand that they're there as reminders of white supremacy. They're there to not just celebrate the atrocities that these white people have caused upon us, but also they're meant to be threatening and imposing. Seeing a statue of Columbus isn't meant to make you feel patriotic. It is meant to remind you that that was the beginning of genocide.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way that people of color see these monuments, and white folks who maybe are more in accompliceship or allyship roles. The way that we see these monuments is not with a sense of pride or nostalgia. It's supposed to scare us. It's supposed to be fearful. They are inanimate cops.
Yeah.
They're there they're reminders of white supremacy. They're reminders of genocide. And what is even the point? We don't need them. I've never been like, hey, let me go take a picture in front of this statue. Like, I don't understand why folks are so keen to hold on to them when they are just reminders of white supremacy.
Well, and the Confederate monuments, especially the bronze statues, they all rolled out in a very specific period of history, of American history. It was, during the Jim Crow era. It was a pushback from the South. To push back specifically. I mean, the whole purpose of these, and they were cheaply made. When these things are taken down, oftentimes they crumble because they're very thin bronze statues. They're not well made, and so they were created to put black people in their place. That was the whole intention. So when you said they're like inanimate cops, it gets back to my statement that the whole role of police officers are to be intimidating. That's what these statues were. These statues were intended to be intimidating. It was intended to promote the oppression of black people, and the fact that you've got guys like Trump that who has no connection to the South other than putting some golf courses in some places. I mean, he's got no connection to this stuff. The fact that he's advocating for these Confederate monuments, and then you hear people say, "Well, are we supposed to rid ourselves of any tribute to Washington or to Jefferson?" Look, they need to be called out for their role in slavery, and in Jefferson's case specifically, the raping of slaves and that kind of stuff. The idea of having offspring with slaves that were also his slave, actually personally being involved in the breeding of what he would consider his house Negroes. I mean, the whole thing is just. There's a level of insanity and depravity that goes with this whole notion of promoting these these people who have through the early parts of U.S. history were abominations. We're just abominations.
I don't, people who look toward the past with nostalgia are looking to the past in ignorance.
Yep.
We have an obligation to look towards the future as to see the world that we want to live in. And for folks that still are holding on to these monuments as if they are supposed to celebrate some aspect of, I don't know, like pride or they're not, whoever looks to these as points of pride or patriotism, what do you want to see in the future? If that's what you want to see in the future is a continued reminder of chattel slavery and indigenous genocide, if that's what you're looking for in the future, then we will not have a future together. Our future will not be shared, because I don't see a world necessary with any monuments at all. I don't see a world where we need to be celebrating anyone, particularly white people, particularly white men. There isn't. We don't need to look to history with nostalgia. We need to look to history with truth. And there is truth in what we are saying. We're not making up that Columbus was a rapist. Look at the primary source document. We're not making up that Confederate monuments were created during Jim Crow in order to participate in the continued monitoring and threatening of black communities. Look it up. We're not saying these things just because they are our opinions. They are based in history. They have a history, a legacy. And if you're trying to hold on to that history and legacy for some reason, for nostalgia, for pride, for patriotism, then we don't have a future together.
I agree with that 100%. I would recommend for those who are listening and for those who are watching, if you go to my YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV, I have a Columbus video that I did. It's Columbus in his own words, and I encourage people to check out the video, because what I'm quoting is from his own journal and his contemporaries in the entire video. It's not a long video; it's only about 7 or 8 minutes. But this is an example of what we're talking about. People need to know the truth of this stuff because, like you said, if you're gonna pretend that there was this romantic time in American history, it's the whole MAGA hat thing, the whole "Make America Great Again." It's when was America so great that there's some necessity to return to that period of time. If you ask white people, they'll try. They have actually done this, and they've done polling, and white people come up with 1959 in that period of time as when America was at its greatest. So in the wake of after World War II, while racism was raging on, and Jim Crow was as violent as it ever was. People were still being lynched. I mean, this is what they're talking about. That's what white Americans view as the greatest time in American history. And so when you see somebody wearing a hat that says "Make America Great Again," I immediately think, oh, so you want to go back to those times when things were anything but great. You want to ignore the fact that people were being murdered, and I think about Trump going to Tulsa for his first MAGA rally that he plans to do. I mean, Tulsa of all places where Greenwood was destroyed by what was called the Black Wall Street. This idea that there are examples of success that Native people and Black people have had that was destroyed by racism. And so when I hear people talk about returning, or looking back with nostalgia on these historical times, there's nothing great about those times. And frankly, even most white people were not living in the utopia that they imagined that they were. So I think it's really important that, like you're suggesting, Regan, that some truth come out about that history, because the whole purpose of history is to learn from the mistakes, not to be nostalgic about the wonderfulness of these tragedies. It's like romanticizing war, romanticizing the dropping of nuclear bombs on a small island country, the romanticizing about the U.S. taking over places like the Philippines and some of the South Pacific, and violently putting down any effort by Filipinos to fight for their independence after being ruled by Spain. So when you look at this history, there's no part of American history that that isn't tremendously blemished by just, again, terrible and heinous acts by the United States.
I think that specifically white folks need to come to terms with the fact that they are often wrong. They are wrong in a lot of ways. And one of the things that they're wrong about is the way that their history is taught. And I say their history because I don't believe in the shared history rhetoric. I think it's incredibly problematic and is used to participate in erasure and create this homogeneous idea that we're all in this together, kumbaya thing, which is not the reality. And I think that if white folks could come to terms that specifically the history of the United States is one of genocide, it is one of chattel slavery, it is one of oppression,
misogyny.
If folks can come to terms with that, misogyny, sexism, transphobia, racism, like literally all of the isms, that is what this country was built on. And we have an obligation to change that moving forward. If you look to the 1950s as a point of nostalgia and ignore all of the other things that were happening. Also, it's important to note that the 1950s was prime time for capitalism and suburbia. So you're looking at individual success as patriotism, which to me makes no sense. Well, if you're looking to the 1950s or even anything in the past, or like George Washington Jefferson in a place of nostalgia or pride, I ask you to just read a history book that is not written by a white New York Times bestseller. I'm not asking for you to read David McCullough's 1776, please. I'm asking you to read Indigenous Peoples History by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, or Black and Latinx History by Paul Ortiz. I'm asking you to look outside of what you deem as accessible and become uncomfortable.
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, Adolf Hitler marveled at some of America's history. I mean, he took from the treatment of Native people his path forward with what he would ultimately do to to Jews and to Muslims, to the Gypsies, to all the people who did not meet the Aryan standards that he was trying to promote. So, I mean, there are people throughout the world. Some of the American history that is praised is some of the worst American history. So it's really important. Look, we're just about out of time here, and I do have to remind people that WBAI continues to be in a fund drive, and we desperately need support from those of you who can support the radio station. We realize that we're still in somewhat partial or more than partial lockdown from COVID-19. We are living in incredible times because of all of this stuff. But those of you who do have the resources that can support WBAI and this program, Let's Talk with John and Regan, I encourage you to go to the pledge line. Go to 516-620-3602. Go to the website www.give2wbai.org. That's GIVE, the number 2, WBAI.org. Make a contribution of any size. Become a buddy, a BAI buddy. Do it in the name of our show. Look, I really can't apologize, but I have to acknowledge that our time slot has moved. We were from 3 to 5, and then we went from 4 to 5, and now we're back from 3 to 4. I don't know that we get our second hour back, but I do know one thing. The more of you who support this program, the better chance we have of getting back to a 2-hour slot. The better chance we have of maintaining a presence in your life. We do try to have the conversations that you're perhaps not getting anyplace else. We know that we're offering not just a Native perspective, two Native perspectives. Regan's perspective as a Native person living in the city, and my perspective as a Native person living on a Native territory in a much more rural area. These are perspectives that you're not going to get anyplace else. And these are perspectives that the mainstream media, on the rare occasions that they ask, they oftentimes are trying to sensationalize it instead of understanding that we have been going through 500 years of oppression. So when anybody talks about history with nostalgia, you just got to ask the question. How do you recognize and how do you reconcile the terrible things in American history? Well, we are examples of that. And I'm not saying because we're living with a foot in each canoe. I'm not going to give that metaphor out there, because most of us who are maintaining our identity as Native people are fighting for something oftentimes a little different than others are. We're fighting again to return to a free and independent existence. And I understand that that's not the same battle that everybody else is fighting. But as we're fighting for that, we do want equity. We do want fairness for other people, black people, brown people, people of different faiths, people of different, gender identity. We want there to be fairness. But at the same time, we're oftentimes fighting a battle that seems almost insurmountable. But we've been doing it for a long time, and we continue to be at it. So I ask those of you who listen to this show and listen to this station to make a contribution to WBAI. Do it in the name of Let's Talk with John and Regan, and be as generous as your circumstance will allow, because that's the only way that we stay on the air. It's the only way that WBAI stays on the air, and it's the only way you're going to hear content like this. I want to thank you again, Regan. I want to thank you for so much of your efforts. I mean, you being on the street and again, being subject to the abuse, the physical abuse and the psychological abuse that you've gone through. I know there are those of us who are built that way, that we have to step up, and we have to step up against injustice. And and it's always it's a tough thing, because we place ourselves at risk. We place oftentimes the security of our families at risk, especially if we have families that we need to take care of. So I applaud anybody who steps up, anybody who's willing to take a stand and to go to the street, to to play some role in standing up to oppression. I want to thank you all, but Regan, as my partner here, I gotta thank you especially.
I appreciate that, John, and I'm going to keep doing the work, and I hope others join me.
All right, this is John Kane with Regan DeLoggins, and this is Let's Talk. We'll see you next week. Yahweh.